Everyone loves S&P 500 index tracking ETFs like BOO, SPY, and IBV. But what if I told you there were other long-standing ETFs that outperformed all S&P 500 tracking ETFs by as much as 3.5 times over the last 10 years? If you're interested in hearing about ETFs that have outperformed the S&P 500 by jaw-dropping margins, then this is the video for you. We'll review 5 of the top growth ETFs that all outperformed the S&P 500 and break down their expense ratios and dividend yields, what index each ETF tracks against, the top 10 companies they invest in, and how each ETF performed over the last 10 years. The returns will blow your mind. And as a little sneak peek, here's what all of the 5 ETFs would be worth if you invested $10,000 in them 10 years ago and had their dividends reinvested. I'll also include VOO on here as a comparison. What a huge difference in returns. Now, we'll reveal which one is which later in the video. But the ETF with the lowest return of the 5 we'll be reviewing shortly almost doubled the return of VOO, and the ETF with the highest return of the group more than tripled the return of VOO. And before we dive in, let me know in the comments your favorite ETF or one you're seriously considering and why. Also, hit that like and subscribe button so those YouTube algorithm experts know they got it right showing you this video. The first ETF on our list is XLK, which is SPDR Select Sector Fund. The fund tracks against the Technology Select Sector Index, which specifically tracks the technology companies in the S&P 500. XLK is the oldest ETF of this group, created in December of 1998. The current expense ratio for XLK is by far the lowest of the group at 0.09%, and it has a dividend yield of 0.71%. Here are the top 10 companies that XLK invests in, which account for over 67% of its investments. As you can see, this ETF has a very heavy investment in Microsoft and Apple, with almost 44% of the assets being invested in between those two companies. If you're high on Microsoft and Apple, then this may be a great ETF for you to invest in. XLK is also by far the largest in total assets, with over $64 billion as of early May. In regards to performance, we'll go over that for each ETF after we do a quick review of the details of the 5 ETFs in our list. So hang around until we get to that part here very soon. The next 4 ETFs are all tied to the semiconductor sector. And the first one on that list is XSD, which is SPDR's S&P Semiconductor ETF. Fun fact for any IT geeks out there, do you know what XSD also stands for in the IT world? That would be XML Schema Definition. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. Now back to your normal programming. XSD tracks against the S&P Semiconductor Select Industry Index, which focuses on the semiconductor companies in the S&P 500. XSD was created in January of 2006 and currently has a relatively high expense ratio at 0.35% and has a dividend yield of just 0.24%. Here are the top 10 companies that XSD invests in, which account for just over 34% of its investments, and the fund currently has around $1.4 billion in assets as of early May. Our next ETF is PSI, and no, we're not talking about pressure per square inch. We're talking about Invesco's Semiconductor ETF. PSI tracks against the Dynamic Semiconductor Intellidex Index, which is made up of 30 semiconductor companies. The fund was created in June of 2005 and currently has an expense ratio of 0.5%, which is by far the highest of all 5 ETFs in this list, and it has a dividend yield of 0.24%. Here's the list of top 10 companies that PSI invests in, which account for almost 48% of its investments, and the fund currently has just under $800 million in assets as of early May. The next ETF on the list is SOXX, SOXX, which is iShares Semiconductor ETF. SOXX tracks against the ICE Semiconductor Index, which is a modified market cap weighted index of 30 semiconductor companies. The fund was created in July of 2001 and currently has an expense ratio which is also relatively high at 0.35%, but it has by far the best dividend yield of the group at 1.63%. Here's the list of top 10 companies that SOXX invests in, which account for over 57% of its investments, and the fund currently has over $12 billion in assets as of early May. And the final ETF on our list is SMH, which is VanEck Semiconductor ETF. SMH tracks against the MVIS U.S. listed semiconductor 25 index. which is also a market cap weighted index of 25 of the largest semiconductor companies. The fund was created in May of 2000 and currently has an expense ratio, which is also at 0.35% like ESD and SOXX, and it has a dividend yield of 0.47%. The top 10 companies that SMH invests in are listed here. As you can see, the fund is very heavily invested in NVIDIA and Taiwan Semiconductor, which account for over 34% of the fund's assets. If you were high on both of those two companies, then this could be a great investment to consider. SMH currently has the second largest amount of assets of the group with over $18 billion as of early May. Okay, now to the part that everyone wants to see the most. Well, it's the most exciting for me at least, and that would be the returns for all 5 of the ETFs. So here's the chart we showed you earlier listing all 5 ETFs. Remember that if you invested $10,000 10 years ago in each of these funds with their dividends reinvested, this is what they would be worth today. First up, coming in with the 5th best return is XLK, worth just over $64,000 after 10 years. The 4th best return is XSD, worth over $72,000. The 3rd best return is PSI, worth over $86,000. The 2nd best return belonged to SOXX, which would now be worth over $94,000. And finally, the top returning ETF at our list, and by quite a wide margin I might add, is SMH, worth almost $112,000. Talk about outperforming the S&P 500 over the last 10 years. And it's not like the S&P 500 had a rough 10 years. The S&P 500 has averaged an annual return of over 11% per year from 2014 through 2023. Just goes to show you there are really some amazing investments out there that can outperform great funds like BOO and others that track the S&P 500. Now, let me be clear. Past performance doesn't mean that over the next 10 years, these ETFs will continue to outperform most of the other ETFs. But with them having all significant investment in the semiconductor industry, there's a good chance they'll continue to perform well. Well, that's it for this video. We reviewed 5 ETFs with phenomenal returns over the last 10 years. We looked at their investment focus, their returns, as well as their expenses and dividend yields. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on these ETFs and if you're invested in them or are considering investing in them. As always, thanks for watching and hanging around to the end. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you know when I put out new content focused on your money and how to manage it best with a little bit of comedy thrown in for good measure. See you next time.